So Ambassador Philippe Gall was born in August 1954 in France. He decided to settle in Seychelles in 1991 and has been working since then for the Seychelles government in the fields of culture and foreign affairs. He also keeps special interest in history, anthropology, tourism, education and environment. He has also published a number of novels and short stories, one of the books we also have. Ambassador Gall is an officer in the French Order of Arts, and this is only about a glimpse of his life's journey. For rest, please welcome the High Commissioner of Republic of Seychelles, Philippe Gall.
I would like to thank the Shrine of English and its director, Mr. Jitender Singh, for having invited me. I'm very happy to have this session with you. One of the first challenges when you study a new language is the accent. I don't know if you have already noticed, but the gentleman who introduced me said that I was born in France. So you will notice that I have a French accent, and I hope it will not be too difficult for you to understand me. I started my career as a journalist, then as a lecturer in French in the university in Thailand for 4 years. So I was used to speak slowly. And being French has advantage and disadvantage when speaking English, because English and French, you know, many words are similar. The pronunciation, of course, is different, but sometimes you are tempted to use a French word thinking that the meaning is the same in English. To give you an example, in French, when we speak of a lady, we want to say that she's charming. We can say she's delicious. Elle est délicieuse. And this is what the French president, Mr. Macron, said to Donald Trump when he met his wife. And the American president was quite shocked when he heard that his wife was delicious. And it was very embarrassing for the French president, because in the French media, the next day, they said that definitely he should be very, very careful, you know, when he translates straight from French into English. Well, so this morning you will get an exposure to my French accent. English was not my first foreign language. I started with Latin and Greek, ancient Latin, ancient Greek, a bit the equivalent of Sanskrit and Pali in India. Then I studied Spanish and later on English. My English was terrible. I was a very, very bad student, and I still remember my English teacher when I was around 14. She asked me a question and I gave the right answer, and she said, my God, how possible? You know the response. So she took a piece of chalk and she wrote a cross in the corner of the blackboard saying, "This is an historic moment. Mr. Lagarde has given us the right answer." So I was born in France, more precisely in the west of France, a region called Brittany, where the French was not the traditional, the native language, even if nowadays everybody speaks French. My grandmother didn't want to speak French. She just spoke her native language, which was Breton. And Breton is totally different. It's a Celtic language. And people from Brittany can understand the people from Cornwall. They can understand the people also from the north of Spain. And for instance, if you say in French, "Je suis né au milieu de la mer," it means I was born in the middle of the ocean. In Breton, this Celtic language, it gives "Mesocanet Chris Armor." You see, it's nothing in common. So I grew up in France. My hometown was a little harbor, and every day I could see boats arriving and departing. And at a very young age, I told myself, when I'm a big man, I will also travel. I will also leave this country. This is what I did when I was 24. I left for Thailand as a press correspondent, another word to say a reporter or a journalist. And at that time my English was still terrible, but I could communicate. And this is the good thing about English. My experience of dealing with students is that the most difficult is to feel comfortable talking to someone in English. You understand everything he says to you or she says to you, but you do not feel comfortable to use another language than your mother tongue. But what you should realize, and this is maybe one of the reasons why English is the first international language nowadays, what you should understand is that in English you communicate. You say what you have to say. As long as people understand you, it's fine. If you make a mistake, nothing terrible. What is important is to speak, to feel comfortable to speak. And step by step, you will feel more and more comfortable till it becomes very natural for you to address people from other backgrounds. One difference between French and English is that when you speak French, is there anyone here studying French also? No. Raise your hand. Okay, so I can say what I want. Is that when you speak French, what you say, the way you say it is as important as what you have to say. So if you make a mistake, you will feel that you give a poor impression of yourself. But in English you communicate. Of course, you should try not to make mistakes, and this is why you are studying the language. but don't hesitate to talk to friends in English, and whenever you meet a foreigner, to start a discussion with him in English. Nobody will judge you, but everybody will appreciate that you make the effort to use another language than your mother tongue. And this is very important, and it's the secret to master a language. Feel comfortable addressing it, addressing an audience, talking to people using another language. And is there anyone here, apart from English, studying another language?
Yes, sir. I'm learning French.
Oh, you're learning French. Okay, congratulations. At least there is one. So, what could you say in French to me?
Bonjour, sir.
Yes, everybody understands the meaning of bonjour. Am I right?
Yeah. Yes.
What does it mean? Good morning. Yes. And
Comment ça va?
comment ça va means
How are you?
yes. Comment ça va means how are you? Right. So you see it. There is one gentleman learning French, but maybe there are other students learning German or Spanish or Chinese or Japanese or any other language. So as I said, I grew up in France, and then I moved to Thailand, and after 4 years in Thailand I went back to France, and I worked in the field of culture. This was my main field of interest. I was in charge of an orchestra, of classical music, of Paris Chamber Music Festival. I was also in charge of Paris Boys Choir, and I had to take care of a group of 20 kids age 8 to 12. And I took them around the world. I organized a tour to Japan, to Korea, to China, to Thailand, and a few other countries. It was a very interesting period of my life, but after a few years, suddenly I was frightened, because it seemed that my life was a very straight avenue. It seems that I knew everything that was going to happen to me. So after 8 years in Paris, I decided to sell everything I had, apart from my books, and I decided to start a new life. And I moved to Seychelles. I sent a letter. You know, sometimes it works. I sent a letter saying, should you need an advisor in the field of culture, I would be delighted to come and help you. They told me, please come for an interview. I used all my savings because it was a little bit far from France. I went there for an interview. The interview was successful. And they say, okay, you start working in 2 months. And I was very, very happy. They asked me, do you have any question? I said, no, everything is fine. Later on, I realized that I should have asked it one question. What was the salary? I forgot to ask it. But I may assure you that the first time I received my salary slip, I thought it was a joke. I asked the people, but how do you survive with so little? And they say, well, first we try not to drink all our salary in a couple of days or in a week. And usually after the 15th of the month, it's really hard. It's very, very tough. So for a number of years, I learned to live with very little. But I love my job. And Seychelles is an archipelago in the middle of the Indian Ocean. It is a tropical paradise. That's the place where the rich and famous from all over the world go, not only for honeymoon, but also to relax. There are many Bollywood stars who enjoy having a rest there. It was a wonderful experience to live in a place where there is no pollution at all. This morning I get up as usually at 2-3 o'clock. I went to the park to do my exercise. At 3 o'clock I was walking and I checked the air quality index. It was 560. I said, oh my God, at 3 o'clock. But I was 8 years ambassador to China, and this was the first thing I was doing every day, switching on my computer, checking the air quality index of the US embassies. And I had 3 kinds of protective masks. So depending on how polluted the air was, I was choosing one mask rather than another mask. The good thing was that wearing a mask, you were totally anonymous. You know, you could walk in the crowd, nobody recognized you. I didn't have to say, no picture, please. Nobody knew. So, but wearing a mask all day, it's not funny. And Seychelles, it doesn't exist, you know, because there is no big industry, there is no gas, no oil, and the population is very small. It's 95,000. The capital is only 25,000. As it was said earlier, there is an Indian community. In fact, 250 years ago, there was absolutely no one living in Seychelles, apart from crocodiles, parrots, and giant tortoises. And even nowadays, when the human population is 95,000, we have in Seychelles 160,000 giant tortoises. They may live up to 250 or some people say even 300 years. When they reach that age, they weigh around 300 kilos. And why we have so many tortoises? The reason is simple. Seychelles used to form part of a continent called Gondwana. Millions of years ago, when India and Africa were attached, and when the 2 continents separated, Seychelles remained in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And this happened during the Jurassic period. Maybe you are not an expert in the Jurassic period, but you may have seen
yes,
the movie Jurassic Park.
Yes, sir.
You know? So crocodiles already existed at that time, as well as giant tortoises. So those who were in the area of Seychelles at that time remained on the island. And in 1770, 248 years ago, the first settlers arrived there. It was a group of 27 persons, and it included 5 Indians. Others were French, who came with African slaves, but the first Indians were laborers. They were coming from Tamil Nadu. They were 3 men. Step by step, the community, the Seychellois community of Indian origin developed. And the Indian influenced a lot the Seychellois culture, the Seychellois way of life. In Seychelles, we celebrate Diwali. At every corner, you can buy some samosa.
Wow.
Unfortunately, dosa was not introduced, because it's one of my favorites, was not introduced by the first settlers. But you will ask me, what about the Chinese? Well, the Chinese arrived in Seychelles 100 years later. So the Indians had settled, and they had influenced the Seychellois community. And the Chinese arrived totally by accident. There were 3 Chinese on the boat, and they had a problem with the engine. So Seychelles was around, they settled there, then even nowadays the community of Chinese is 5 times smaller than the Indian community. So 27 years ago, I settled in Seychelles, and it's a beautiful place. And the very good thing is that the Seychellois society is made of people of French origin, of African origin, of Indian origin, of Chinese origin. It is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious society. In Seychelles, racism does not exist, because there are very few people who can say that they are 100% of one specific origin. Most people are of mixed blood. And I'm sure you understand, you know, when the most pretty girl, you know, on the island was either French, Chinese, African, well, you know, human nature. And usually in Seychelles, people were not getting married. They were living together as long as everything was fine. They were having kids together, and average was 8 to 16, usually with 2, 3, or 4 different fathers. And this was, it was the traditional way, because the wedding was quite expensive, and because, you know, the main island of Seychelles is from north to south 30 kilometers, from east to west 10 kilometers, you know. We know each other. It's really a small it's really a small community. And because the people come from so many origins, it is a very tolerant society where you accept all differences from a very young age. And because nature is so beautiful, you have forest over 95% of the land area. People learn at a very, very young age that we do not own nature. We belong to nature. In Seychelles, you will never see a bird in a cage. You will never see a fish in an aquarium. Normally, when we build a house, it should not be higher than a coconut tree. If you want to cut a tree on your property, you need a permit because we respect trees. If you want to burn leaves and branches at the back of your garden, you need a permit because you take a risk. You know, Seychelles is definitely not California, but we are very, very cautious because it belongs to all of us, and we have to pass on the country with its beautiful nature to future generations. So Seychelles is a place where the protection of nature is extremely important. And we learn, as I said, at a very young age, the importance of what is called biodiversity, what is called ecosystems. I mean, all the various natural wonders that we have around us. And I was living in Seychelles as an advisor to the Minister of Culture for many years, and one day I was requested to move to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a special advisor to the minister. I said, oh wow, this is a great job. I was telling myself, special advisor, you give advices. I would love doing that. But in fact, I was a speech writer. Each and every time the minister had to deliver a speech, I had to write it. And my first Minister of Foreign Affairs hated having to deliver speeches. He didn't like to address an audience the way I'm doing now. He was not comfortable. And he was always reading, and he was always telling me, please, in your draft speech, express no ID, just facts and figures, you know. Numbers, facts and figures. So during this period of my life, I have written the most boring speeches one can imagine. And the reason why he didn't want any ID was that he was afraid that someone in the audience asked him to elaborate a little bit, to say a little bit more about the ID that he has just mentioned. And after 5 years of writing speeches for quite a number of ministers, I went to see my president and I said, listen, I do not want to continue because I have written speeches for 5 years. All my creativity is going into this. I would like to do something else. at that time, he proposed me to be appointed ambassador. And what I learned, is that when you would like to do something, there is nothing wrong in saying, I would like to do this, or I would like to do that. There is nothing wrong in expressing interest. If you don't do it, later on you will start having regrets. When I met your director, I told him that in my life, I have a principle. I accept to get older with good memories and bad memories, because we cannot avoid this. This is life. But I said, I do not want to have regrets. Secrets. We all have secrets. This is also human nature. But I do not want to have regrets. So whenever I wanted to do something, I did it. In 2008, most of you were still quite young, 10 years ago, I was ambassador to China, and Beijing hosted the Olympic Games. And the computer company Lenovo, with the China Daily, the main newspaper, they organized a competition to recruit 7 foreigners to be a torchbearer. The one running around the stadium with, not a microphone, but the torch, I was a candidate. I was not selected, for reasons still unclear, but at least I got an article about my country in the Chinese newspaper. Also in the New York Times, they wonder how an ambassador can be interested in being a torchbearer for Olympic Games. And 20 years later, when the NASA, 20 years earlier, when the NASA was looking for a non-scientist to be sent not to the moon but in the space, they didn't want to have a scientist. They wanted to send, in one of the air shuttles, they wanted to send someone, a normal person. I was a candidate too, one more time I was not selected. But anyway, the rocket exploded, after 1 or 2 minutes, and unfortunately all the crew perished. And they selected a lady, an American teacher. But you see, I wanted to do it. We all want either to go to the moon or to do something like that. And each and every time that there is something I would like to do, I just do it. If, for instance, when I go out, I see Amitabh Bachchan, I will invite him for tea, if he has time. Well, and I think it's very important in life not to let regrets accumulate, So it does not mean that whenever you have the feeling that you should do this or do that, you should do it. You should always use first your critical mind. Is it going to add a plus to your life, to your emotions? Is it going to contribute to your personal development? But never keep things, wishes inside you, because it would turn better. And feel free to be adventurous. You are young. If you want the world belong to you, you have to be proactive. Mastering a language, especially English, which is the first international language, this is a very positive step in the right direction. Because nowadays, if you do not speak English, there is a limit to what you can achieve, And so I congratulate all of you for having decided to learn the language or to improve your level of knowledge. And I do not know what I guess that some of you are already working. I do not know in which sectors you are. Maybe some teachers, maybe others are still students in engineering, in business, in whatever. But knowing English, feeling comfortable, feeling at ease, speaking, it is a ticket out of mediocrity. This is something that opens all doors for you to achieve some very positive result in your life. Life is a wonderful gift. All of us, we were born with a number of promises of success, of fulfillment, of happiness. But it depends on us to make it happen. The strength is in us. It's not elsewhere. Parents, teachers, yes, sure, they have a share in this development process. But I think you are in your 20s, most of you. I see no one like me in his 60s. So you are at the age when you take control of your life. You are at the age when you can start achieving great things. And you belong to a very dynamic nation. You belong to a nation with 5,000 years of history. How many among you have traveled abroad? Can you raise your hand? Who has traveled abroad? Only one. Who would like to travel abroad? Okay, better I ask you. Who does not want to? Who does not want to travel abroad? Okay. So it means that you want the world one day to belong to you. And of course, being Indian, having an Indian passport, you can travel to a number of destinations. But there are some countries, in Europe, in the US, in Australia, in New Zealand, they are quite tough, and the normal procedure to get the visa is to go through an interview. And some candidates are just rejected. They have the money, they have the connection, but the knowledge of English is too low, and the immigration officer will consider that they will not be able to survive in an English-speaking environment. So, once again, it is very important that you you continue. Learning, as you know, is a lifelong process. When you study a new language, it's difficult. There is no mystery. It's difficult because a language is also a way of thinking, not just a way of putting words in a certain order, a way of respecting some grammatical rules and so on. It's a way of thinking, and it's not necessarily easy to adapt. But sorry, after the first difficulties, after the first months, after the first year, suddenly you will feel that you have the capacity to express yourself in that language. So it's just a matter of practicing. You see, I told you English is not my native language. And at the beginning, I was a terrible student in English. But now I feel comfortable. I make some mistakes. It has never happened that someone say, you shouldn't say this, you should say it in another way. The point is that I am also a writer, as it was said at the beginning. And I knew when I was very young that one day I would just be a writer, and this is what I'll do in a few months after I retire. And I have always been interested in the way a language is built, the ways the sentences are articulated, the meaning of words, the history of words. But in today's world, it's not necessary to have this kind of curiosity. What is important is to convey, when you speak in a foreign language, to convey a message that says in simple and plain English what you want to communicate, what you want to share with others. And the fact that you are here this morning, the fact that you have enrolled in this school shows very well that each of you has a potential. I mentioned the word promise. All of us, we were born with a number of promises. I was referring to this potential. Only limit, as people say, is the sky. You have to be ambitious. We live in a more and more competitive world. I told you about my itinerary, and I am not sure that today, if I started in life the way I started, that it would still be possible. But each generation creates new opportunities. And your generation, you know, when I was your age, there was no, of course, no internet, there was no smartphone, there was, and I was living in a small village, you know, in the west of France, and we didn't have all the techniques that you may be using today. And we also know that the world is, thank you, is smaller and smaller, that you can go from one place to another place very easily in a very short period of time. This is fantastic. And one more advice that I would like to give you. I used to train students to go through interviews to get a job. Yes. Good. Thank you. Do you mind if I drink?
Yeah, sir. Why not?
It's not champagne.
Sorry.
Yes. No. Anyway, it's the night is still very young, fortunately. So, something very important is that when I was conducting interviews, I like to be in front of, among the candidates, I was always selecting the one who were passionate. You may be passionate about your job, but you may be passionate about other things too. I'm referring to, it may be sports, it may be painting, sculpture, whatever. It may be stamps collection, it may be, but it's very important that while you develop your skills in the language and also in your field of study, it's very important that you develop at the same time the gift that you may have. Each one of us has a special gift. My mother didn't go to university. She was a fantastic mother, and she just went to a school after the Second World War to learn cooking, to learn all these things. I belong to a family of 6, and my parents, I don't know if they were very modern, but 3 boys, 3 girls, and they decided that the 6 of us would get the same education. So the 6 of us, we learned to play football, we learned to some cooking, we also learned needlework and ironing clothes. I do not think that many boys here are very good at needlework, you know. But my parents wanted that to develop some survival tips and a kind of survival kit, so that whenever we are alone, we can always manage, and we can also face situations less comfortable. Basically, this is what I wanted to share with you. You have been listening to me, so now I would like to listen to you. Not all together, but you could, if it's agreeable to the director, maybe if you want to say a few words, and then give them a chance to ask us some questions.
So, Excellency, why did you sit down now? Yeah? Better I take the position now.
Okay.
And
okay.
Thank you so much. Clap for him for one.